Picture this. It's the year 865 AD, inside a Danish longhouse heavy with smoke and silence. A messenger has just finished speaking. No one moves. No one speaks. But the violence has already begun. 4 brothers sit around a wooden table. They are the sons of Ragnar Lothbrok. Sigurd Snake-in-the-Eye stares down at his own hand. He's holding a small knife, calmly trimming his fingernails as if this were any other evening. As the message sinks in, as the truth of his father's death settles into his bones, Sigurd doesn't shout. He doesn't look up. He simply keeps cutting. The blade slips past the nail, slices through skin, and digs straight down until it hits bone. Blood pools across his finger, but Sigurd doesn't flinch. He doesn't feel it. Across from him, Bjorn Ironside grips a chess piece carved from solid bone. His jaw tightens, his hand clenches. There's a sharp crack as the piece explodes in his fist. Shards drive deep into his palm. Blood begins to drip, slow and steady, onto the board below. This wasn't grief. This was a declaration of war. This was the exact moment the revenge of the Great Heathen Army began. Before we dive deeper into these brutal, forgotten stories of survival and suffering, if you enjoy uncovering the hidden truths of history, consider hitting that like button and subscribing. And let me know in the comments where you're listening from. I love the idea that we're exploring these ancient stories together, from all corners of the world, connected by a shared curiosity about the past. To understand why the sons of Ragnar reacted this way, you have to understand the insult. The messenger confirmed that King Aella of Northumbria hadn't simply killed Ragnar Lothbrok. He had tortured him. Ragnar, the terror of coasts, the breaker of kingdoms, had been thrown into a pit of vipers. No armor, no weapon, no chance to die with honor. The snakes took their time. It was slow. It was humiliating. King Aella wanted to prove something. He wanted the world to see that Ragnar wasn't a legend, just a man. But as the venom crept through his body, Ragnar laughed. With his final breath, he spoke a prophecy that would echo across Europe. How the little piglets would grunt if they knew how the old boar suffered. Aella thought he was ending a threat. In reality, he was lighting a fuse. He forgot something critical. The old boar had sons, and those piglets were now the most dangerous warlords in Europe. Back in Denmark, there was no mourning, no funeral songs, only movement. Sigurd pulled the knife from his finger. Bjorn wiped the blood from his hand. And together, the brothers sent out a call that reached every edge of the Viking world. This wouldn't be a raid for silver. This wasn't about slaves or loot. Treasure meant nothing. This was extermination. Warriors came from Norway, from Sweden, from Ireland. Old enemies stood shoulder to shoulder. Blood feuds were put on hold. Mercenaries refused payment just to be part of what was coming. Everyone understood the scale of the target. King Aella believed himself safe behind stone walls across the sea. He had no idea he'd just summoned a force unlike anything England had ever seen. The Great Heathen Army was forming, and it was coming to make sure that everyone involved in Ragnar's death would die screaming. Late in 865 AD, sentries along the coast of East Anglia stared out at the horizon and felt their stomachs drop. A Viking alarm usually meant 3 ships, maybe 5. Fast raiders, a quick strike. This time, the horizon itself was moving. Hundreds of dragon-headed longships cut through the mist. The sea was black with sails. This wasn't a raiding party. It was a floating city, a migration of death. Historians call it the Great Heathen Army. The Anglo-Saxon Chronicle called it something simpler and far more terrifying, the Great Host. This wasn't just warriors. There were smiths, women, children, horses. These people weren't coming to steal and leave. They were coming to stay, to burn fields, to break kingdoms, to take land and never give it back. And leading this massive force wasn't the strongest brother Bjorn. It wasn't the stoic Sigurd. It was the cripple, Ivar the Boneless. For centuries, historians have debated that name. Was he born with brittle bones? Was he unable to walk? Or was it a metaphor for his unnatural flexibility in battle? The sagas say he was often carried into combat on a shield. But don't misunderstand what boneless meant. Ivar was the mind behind the war. While his brothers burned with rage, Ivar operated with cold, mathematical cruelty. He understood something crucial. Killing a king like Aella wouldn't be done with axes alone. It would take patience, planning, fear. So instead of sailing north toward Northumbria, Ivar did something that confused everyone. He landed in East Anglia. He bypassed his target entirely. This wasn't hesitation. It was strategy. Ivar didn't terrorize East Anglia into battle. He terrorized them into submission. He demanded horses, hundreds of them. In one move, he turned his seaborne army into mounted cavalry. All winter long, he gathered supplies, sharpened blades, collected intelligence, and let the knowledge of his presence drift north like a disease. King Aella waited and waited. Ivar understood something most men don't. The anticipation of pain is often worse than the pain itself. By the time the snow melted in 866, the Great Heathen Army had transformed. No longer a mob of angry warriors, they were now a disciplined machine, mounted, supplied, and hungry. They turned their eyes north. The piglets were done grunting. It was time to hunt the boar. While Ivar prepared his army, Northumbria was busy tearing itself apart. The kingdom was in the middle of a brutal civil war. King Aella, the man who killed Ragnar, was fighting against the rightful king, Osbert. Their hatred for each other was so consuming that they failed to notice the shadow creeping up from the south. Civil war is a gift to an invader, and Ivar the Boneless accepted it gladly. In the autumn of 866 AD, the army moved. Using the horses taken from East Anglia, the Vikings advanced with terrifying speed. They ignored small villages. They had no interest in distractions. Their target was York, the ancient Roman heart of the north. But Ivar didn't just choose the city, he chose the day, November 1st, All Saints' Day. Think about what that meant. The nobles, the military commanders, the bishops, all gathered inside churches, unarmed, distracted, deep in prayer, expecting feasts and divine protection. What they got was the heathen army. The Vikings struck while the bells were still ringing. York's defenses were barely manned. The gates fell before hymns had ended. It wasn't a battle. It was a massacre inside a sanctuary. By sunset, the capital of Northumbria was Viking-controlled. But Ivar didn't burn York. That would have been a raider's mistake. Instead, he occupied it, repaired the Roman walls, stocked the granaries. He turned York into a fortress deep inside enemy territory. Then he sat down on Aella's throne and waited. Because Ivar knew exactly what would happen next. The fall of York would force his enemies to stop fighting each other and come to him. Ivar the Boneless was counting on it. He wanted King Aella and King Osbert to unite. He wanted them to bring their armies straight to the walls of York. Why chase enemies across the countryside when you can sit still and let them come to you? Why hunt the mice when you can place the cheese and wait for the trap to close? For 4 long months, Northumbria endured the humiliation. A heathen army sat in its capital, eating its food, repairing its walls, mocking its gods. Pride burned hotter than reason. Finally, in March of 867 AD, the unthinkable happened. Aella and Osbert shook hands. The rivals combined their forces into a single massive army. It was a crusade before the word truly existed. They marched north, convinced that God himself would guide them, convinced this was a holy reckoning that would cleanse their land. On March 21st, Palm Sunday, they attacked. At first, it looked like victory. The Northumbrians slammed into York's ancient Roman walls with desperate fury. They found weak points. They smashed gates. A cheer erupted from the English ranks as they poured into the city, flooding its narrow streets, convinced the Vikings were retreating. They didn't realize they'd been invited inside. Ivar hadn't lost the walls. He had abandoned them. The moment the bulk of the Northumbrian army squeezed into the tight alleys of York, the trap snapped shut. Vikings appeared on rooftops. They surged from side streets. Shields locked at both ends of the main avenues, sealing the exits. York became a claustrophobic kill-box. Numbers meant nothing now. The long spears of the English levies were useless in close quarters. The battle collapsed into a brutal brawl of axes and knives. Panic spread instantly. The Northumbrians were packed so tightly they couldn't swing their weapons, couldn't retreat, couldn't breathe. They were butchered where they stood. King Osbert fought bravely, cutting his way through the chaos, but bravery didn't matter. He was struck down and trampled into the mud of the city he had tried to save. The crusade became a slaughter, but amidst the carnage the Vikings were searching. There was one man who was not to be killed. The sons of Ragnar stood back from the fighting, scanning faces, watching the dying, looking for a single crown. King Aella saw his army collapse. He watched his rival fall, and slowly, with dawning horror, he realized the truth. The walls he had breached were now his prison. He tried to flee. He couldn't. A wall of Danish shields closed in. Aella was dragged from his horse, stripped of his weapons, and forced to his knees in blood-soaked mud. The Battle of York was over. Silence returned to the city, broken only by the groans of the dying. The Vikings did not execute Aella. That would have been mercy. Instead, they chained him. They looked at him not with rage, but with anticipation. The war was finished. The ritual was about to begin. The Great Hall of York had seen many kings, but never a trial like this. Aella was dragged into the center of the room, caked in mud and blood, his robes torn, his crown long gone. Around him stood the victorious chieftains of the Great Heathen Army, but his eyes locked onto the four figures seated on the dais. Bjorn Ironside sat with arms crossed, staring at Aella the way a butcher studies meat. Ubba toyed with the haft of his axe. Sigurd Snake-in-the-Eye watched in complete silence, his unblinking stare more unsettling than any threat. And then there was Ivar. Ivar the Boneless lay on a pile of furs. His legs were twisted and useless, but his eyes burned with cold, reptilian intelligence. He didn't need to stand. The room already belonged to him. This was the prophecy fulfilled. Aella looked at them and saw the little piglets Ragnar had spoken of. But these were no piglets. They were wolves. We don't have a transcript of what was said next, but the sagas paint a scene of terrifying intimacy. Ivar didn't shout. He didn't rage. He likely spoke softly. He would have asked about the pit, about the snakes. Did my father cry out? Did he beg? How long did it take for the venom to stop his heart? Every question was a blade twisting deeper. Ivar forced Aella to relive his crime, to confess it, to admit he had murdered a legend without honor. Aella had denied Ragnar a weapon. Now Ivar would deny Aella a quick death. In Viking law, a clean execution, a sword to the heart, a swift decapitation, was a mercy, a respectful end. Aella had forfeited that right. There would be no ransom, no exile, no negotiation. Ivar gave a signal. The guards didn't take Aella to a dungeon. They dragged him out of the city. The sons of Ragnar had chosen a punishment so horrifying that for centuries scholars would argue it couldn't possibly be real. They prepared the blood eagle. The execution site was likely a high ridge, visible to the Viking army and the terrified survivors of York. Aella was forced face down. His arms and legs were staked into the ground, stretched tight. He was no longer a king. He was a canvas. The blood eagle, Blodurn, is one of the most infamous executions in human history. For a long time, historians dismissed it as myth. For Aella, it was brutally real. The executioner approached with a long knife. This was not hacking. This was anatomy. First, the skin of Aella's back was sliced open. 2 long cuts ran from shoulder to lower spine. The skin was peeled back, exposing muscle and the white lattice of ribs beneath. Aella screamed until his voice broke. Then came the hammer and chisel. One by one, the ribs were severed from the spine. Crack, crack, crack. The sound of snapping bone echoed across the field. Each rib was forced outward, bent back like wings. The man was being turned inside out. But it wasn't finished. The executioner reached into the open chest cavity and pulled the lungs free, draping them over the broken ribs. As Aella's breath failed, the lungs collapsed and fluttered, the red tissue rising and falling like blood-soaked wings. A living eagle. Medical experts believe Aella likely died from shock or lung collapse before the ritual was complete. But Viking belief held that if a man screamed, he would not enter Valhalla. Aella screamed. He died not as a warrior, but as a sacrifice to Odin, a warning carved into flesh. When it was over, his body was left on the ridge. The debt was paid. The old boar had been avenged. But as the sons of Ragnar stepped away, they felt something unsettling. The rage hadn't faded. The Great Heathen Army was still hungry. Aella was dead, but there were other kings, and the army turned south. With Northumbria shattered, a normal army would have gone home. The revenge was complete. Justice, by their standards, had been served. The Great Heathen Army did neither. In 869 AD, they returned to East Anglia, the very kingdom where they had first landed years earlier. Back then, King Edmund had given them horses, hoping to buy his safety. He believed he'd made a deal. Ivar the Boneless did not honor deals with men he considered prey. This time, the Vikings didn't ask for tribute. They demanded the kingdom. King Edmund of East Anglia was a deeply pious man, a devout Christian. He refused to fight a war he knew he couldn't win, but he also refused to bow to pagan rulers. For Ivar, that defiance was reason enough. Edmund was captured near Hawkson, and here, Ivar chose a different lesson. If Aella's death was about anatomy, Edmund's would be about archery. According to the Passion of Saint Edmund, the king was tied to a tree. Ivar wanted to see if the Christian god would intervene. Viking archers lined up, not to kill him quickly, but to break him slowly. They fired volley after volley. They didn't aim for the heart. They aimed for limbs, shoulders, flesh. Chroniclers wrote that Edmund was pierced with so many arrows he resembled a hedgehog, his body bristling with shafts, pinned to the tree, bleeding from dozens of non-fatal wounds at once. Through it all, Edmund refused to renounce his faith. He called out to Christ again and again. Ivar grew bored. The boneless commander had no patience for martyrs. With a gesture, he ended the spectacle. A swordsman stepped forward and severed Edmund's head with a single blow, tossing it into the brambles so his followers couldn't bury him whole. Edmund the martyr did not die because he killed Ragnar. He died because he stood in the path of the avalanche. His execution sent a message to every remaining kingdom in England. There would be no neutrality, no negotiation. You would die screaming like Aella or praying like Edmund. Either way, you would die. By 874 AD, two of England's four great kingdoms were effectively destroyed. Northumbria was reduced to a puppet state. East Anglia became a graveyard. Next was Mercia. King Burgred of Mercia looked at what happened to Aella. He looked at Edmund. He saw the blood eagle and the hedgehog, and he understood. These were not men you could bargain with, and they were not men you could defeat. So Burgred made a choice history would never forgive. He ran. As the Vikings advanced on his capital at Repton, Burgred abdicated the throne, gathered what gold he could, and fled to Rome. He died there in exile, buried far from the land he was sworn to protect. The Vikings didn't even need to draw their swords. Fear conquered Mercia for them. Now look at the map of England. Almost all of it is dark. Only one kingdom remained free, Wessex. If Wessex fell, England would vanish. The island would become a western extension of Scandinavia. The Great Heathen Army knew it. They turned south like an avalanche. But in Wessex, they found something new. Not an arrogant tyrant like Aella. Not a martyr like Edmund. Not a coward like Burgred. They found a young man named Alfred. At the time, Alfred was not the Great. He was sickly, plagued by chronic pain, overshadowed by his warrior brother, King Ethelred. But Alfred possessed something Ivar respected, a mind. When the Vikings attacked Reading in 871, the battles were brutal and inconclusive. Losses were horrific on both sides. For the first time, the Great Heathen Army met resistance that bit back, but numbers still mattered. Reinforced by a second wave, the Great Summer Army, the Vikings overwhelmed Wessex. When Ethelred died, Alfred inherited the crown in the middle of a war zone, and he did the unthinkable. He paid them. The Danegeld, a massive tribute of silver, bought peace. Some called it cowardice. But Alfred wasn't running. He was buying time. Burgred paid to save himself. Alfred paid to save his kingdom. He knew he couldn't win yet. He needed ships, fortresses, training, intelligence. So while the Vikings settled into their conquered lands, believing Wessex was broken, Alfred watched, studied, planned. The sons of Ragnar had taken vengeance, but they had also awakened the architect of their downfall. After the execution of King Edmund, the most terrifying man in Europe vanished. Ivar the Boneless disappears from English records. For centuries, historians puzzled over it. Did he retire? Was he killed? The answer lies across the Irish Sea. In the Annals of Ulster, Ivar reappears as Eamar, the king of the Norse of Ireland and Britain. After breaking England's kingdoms, he returned to Dublin to rule as an emperor of the North. But the gods have a sense of irony. Ivar didn't die in battle. He didn't fall with a sword in his hand. In 873 AD, the annals record that he died of a sudden, hideous disease. The man whose mind was a weapon was defeated by his own body. A quiet end for a monster. But legend tells a darker story. According to Viking folklore, Ivar ordered his body returned to England. He was buried on the coast where the invasion began. His prophecy was simple. As long as his bones guarded England, no foreign invader would conquer it. For 2 centuries, the curse seemed real, until 1066. The saga claims William the Conqueror unearthed Ivar's grave, found the body undecayed, and burned it to ashes, only then daring to invade. History or myth, either way, Ivar's legacy was complete. He avenged his father. He destroyed kingdoms. He reshaped Britain. The piglet became a monster, but monsters leave ruins behind. The Great Heathen Army didn't just kill. They stayed. They farmed, traded, ruled. Their lands became the Danelaw. Their language and laws still echo in England's place names today. Ragnar died laughing in a pit of snakes. His sons brought glory and chaos. And from that chaos, England was forced to evolve. In the swamps of Wessex, Alfred was done paying, done waiting. He was building ships, fortresses, a nation. The sons of Ragnar had won their revenge. But could they hold what they'd taken? If you want to see how a sickly scholar king defeated the greatest warriors of the Viking Age and earned the title the Great, make sure you're subscribed. Our next video explores Alfred's impossible survival and the birth of England itself. Until then, remember, history is written by the victors, but it's built on the bones of the vanquished.